because this is one of those issues that the more light is shed on the issue, the clearer things will be. One of the avenues we haven't explored yet is what the rolling out, say, of the Hobby Lobby decision will mean. What will it mean when Christian Scientists, for example, decide that their religion, which doesn't provide for any organized health care, doesn't want to provide it to its employees. I don't know if any Christian Scientists would ever make that claim, but it's a logical one. Or Jehovah's Witnesses resisting blood transfusions or something like that. We have a really rich tradition of American religious groups taking themselves out of the mainstream in some way that overlaps with healthcare. And it would be really interesting to find out whether anyone really in those groups really feels that this affects them as well. If it doesn't, that's another testimony to the fact this is a specious argument and a Trojan horse.
Outside of the realm of religious liberty, what do you think some of the best coverage of religion in public life has been that you've seen, read, or heard?
I'm sorry, outside of the LGBT issue?
No, I'm sorry, outside of the religious liberty issue.
Oh, go ahead.
No.
I'm just interested, my mind immediately goes to the incredibly wide and affectionate coverage that Pope Francis gets. And I have mixed feelings about that. I think on the one hand it is very good. Certainly what Pope Francis says is appealing and profound and important, and it rejoices my heart to hear a lot of it. At the same time, the coverage of it is a little facile, and it overlooks the great gulf between the pronouncements of an individual, albeit arguably the most important single individual in Christianity, against the very complex structure atop which he sits, and which in many cases is very unresponsive to the time. So that, to contrast, for example, the sounds coming from Rome from the sounds coming from the Archdiocese of Chicago would be a very interesting thing.
I think the coverage of the Pope is very, very interesting. Invariably, when I'm speaking, some young Roman Catholic, usually young man, stands up and says, "Bishop, what should I do? I'm a Roman Catholic, I'm gay, blah, blah, blah." And I resist the urge to say, "Run, run." I'm actually looking for the time when actually the Pope will be critiqued, because very little has changed other than tone. Now, tone is not unimportant by a long shot, and I love this Pope. Most of you are not even old enough to remember a movie called Shoes of the Fisherman with Anthony Quinn. There you go, a couple of old guys back there. About a very similar person who became Pope, and the thematic plot of the movie was there was an enormous famine in China, and China was about to overrun all of its neighbors to steal their food. And the Pope makes the decision to sell all the art in the Vatican Museum to buy rice for the people of China. I mean, this is a guy who just might be up for something crazy and Christian like that. But so far, there's not been a lot of change. And I think when the honeymoon is over, there will be that kind of scrutiny. I also think that it's a big ship to turn around, even if the captain wants to. And not unlike the presidency, there's a bureaucracy in Washington is there before the president arrives, and will be there after the president leaves. The same is true of the Vatican. And so I pray for him every day. I don't envy him his job. I love who he is so far, but there's not been a lot of change, and certainly not around LGBT issues. And what an indictment of the church for the Pope to make news saying, "Who am I to judge?" when in fact Jesus said that all the time, right? So why did that make news? That's an indictment of all of us. of how judgmental we have been.
Mm-hmm. That's actually, that one little point is an exceptionally good one, too, to talk about the coverage, the media coverage of things. Because when Pope Francis said that on the flight back from South America, it was reported rightly as a very important and profound insight, perhaps signaling some shifts in emphasis. What people didn't realize was that was taken directly from the gospel lesson of the coming Sunday. So it was already in his mind, since he was going to have to preach on that text coming up. But no one seems to have noticed that this might not be quite as exceptional as you think, because that's the particular passage on which he was already working. So that those words sprang from his mouth is it's not surprising.
I think one very good story to do would be to profile the PR firm that is working for the Vatican. Because there is a former journalist who's running his PR. Now let's move on to the wide shot, sort of new frontiers for people of faith, LGBT folks, and public life. Bishop Robertson, you've been writing a lot recently about what you're calling intersectionality, that LGBT folks need to take on in a serious way care for people other than themselves. And I'm wondering where you have seen that the most, that intersectionality.
Yeah, I think this is the most important thing happening in the LGBT community right now, which is the recognition that oppression, wherever it occurs and to whom it ever occurs, bears enormous similarities with other oppressed groups, and that one of the ways the oppressor, however defined, keeps us oppressed is to keep us fighting with each other, so that we don't band together and fight against the oppressor, right? So we fight over money, we fight over turf, we fight over power, all kinds of things. As opposed to, here's what I see happening, and it is happening where I see it most active, is in young LGBT scholars. They don't want to talk about anything but intersectionality. The ways in which oppression around race and gender and able-bodiedness and orientation and gender identity, and the ways that all of those intersect. And you know, one of the stories I would love to see you write is about how, in fact, middle to upper class gay white men define LGBT for most Americans. When in fact what's happening is that most children being raised by LGBT couples are being raised by black lesbians in Alabama and Mississippi, all of whom are living on the edge of poverty, if not in poverty. Now, that is not who comes to mind when Americans think of LGBTI people, right? They think of two white guys who maybe adopted their children at $60,000 to $100,000 a piece from somewhere overseas and are fighting over where to have brunch on Sunday. So the intersection of poverty and gender, gender identity, race, those are largely not out there. And I think that's where the most exciting work has been done. A very recent example of this is right after the Ferguson events. All the LGBT organizations, I mean, a huge number of them, some of them I'd never even heard of, signed a joint statement in support of the citizens, particularly the African-American citizens of Ferguson. Now, only a few of those organizations are ostensibly related to race or poverty. So I think it's a significant development that it looked to be about 25 LGBT organizations saw fit to express their support for African Americans in Ferguson, Missouri. And I think you're going to see very much more of that. And I would say it's a significant story for two reasons. One is the one you mentioned, Jason, about I think the maturation of our community will result in our caring for people other than our own selves. Either learning to care for LGBT people outside of the United States, as well as caring for other people. I think it will decide whether this is a gay rights movement or a justice movement. And if it's a justice movement, it's about justice for all, not just for LGBT people. But the other thing is that it's a strategic movement within our community to do this intersectional work. Because if we don't show up for undocumented workers and unaccompanied children at the border, and for African Americans and Spanish-speaking people and other groups, why would they think to show up to support us in our efforts? So I think this intersectionality is just really, really important. We'll also see another test of this when we get marriage, and it's looking more and more like the Supreme Court will take it up this coming term. For a long time we thought it would be yet one more year, but I'm of a mind now that they will take it up. When that happens, will all the LGBT money dry up because we've got marriage? While, in the state of Pennsylvania, you can get married, but your boss can fire you the next day for reading in the paper that you're gay, right? Which is an economic issue, job security. And will the intersectionality work to bring us together and not just care about those affluent gay white men and to care about the rest of the LGBT community as well?
But showing up in difficult places, showing up in places that are already difficult, and then showing up as gay in those places can be particularly difficult. I know that both of you recently traveled to El Salvador. So Bishop Erwin, you have spoken to me a bit about your experience of being the gay bishop in El Salvador, but not there to talk about gay rights at all.
Certainly, because the life of Christian churches around the world varies so much with their local contexts, that for many of our fellow Christians in other places, discussion of LGBT issues would be a luxury. They're not to the place yet where they're even ready for that. That even the equality of men and women is a contested area, and there is a bit of culture shock in crossing back and forth. We know from your trip to Uganda as well, but from my recent travels, and Bishop Robinson was also in El Salvador not long ago, that was my visit to El Salvador, to our companion church, the Lutheran church there, was the first time, I think, that their bishop actually spoke in a semi-public setting about the needs of the LGBT community in his country, and that his church was prepared in some ways to meet them, that they hoped to be an inclusive church. But they got to that in a complicated way through their care. That church is devoted to the care for the very poorest in society. And among the very poorest are homeless AIDS sufferers. And those folks have introduced our church to, in that place, to a new category of being, to gay people, to transsexual people, which I think our church was unaware of their existence in a way. And now my El Salvadoran counterparts are actually exploring these dimensions of human reality that they'd overlooked in their own societies because they haven't gotten there yet. It's a machismo society as well, as they say. They can't quite see how to make all the connections yet, but they've opened their hearts to the possibility, and they wanted me personally to know, this is the one little advantage of being the famous gay bishop, is they wanted to tell me about it, that they had made this discovery and they were going to work in that direction, which I found incredibly inspiring, though they had a long way to go.
I believe you said the code word was something like openness?
Yes, openness, exactly. Which simply meant we will entertain new ideas and new people. Let me add to the intersectionality point the fact that, and this is not so important as far as our social lives in the country, but there is a new generation of theologians who are doing wonderful work in listening to the voices of people who have been excluded from the theological conversation for centuries, and finding in that intersectionality new ways of understanding the work of God in humankind and in human society. We have an incarnational faith, as most Christian churches do, and we believe that God is not separate from the world, but works within it. And this new theological thinking really enriches the conversation about God's work and finds God in many places that traditional churches would not have in the past.
Well, I'd like to open up the conversation to questions from the audience. I believe Marshall